Macbeth, the Thane of Clams. Macbeth was a great Scottish nobleman who commanded the army of King Duncan of Scotland. He was called the Thane of Clams and he belonged to the same family as the king. King Duncan argued with some of his noblemen. They refused to obey him as their ruler and a war broke out between them. The noblemen were helped by the King of Norway, who landed in Scotland with an army to fight King Duncan. King Duncan sent Macbeth and Banquo, two of his most faithful generals, to attack the disobedient noblemen. After a terrible fight, King Duncan's men defeated their enemies, and the King of Norway was forced to ask for peace. In the battle, Macbeth fought with great bravery. All the soldiers and messengers talked about him and praised his conduct. King Duncan wanted to reward him by giving him a new honor. The two generals, Macbeth and Banquo, were returning from the battle across a wild and lonely part of the country. Suddenly, three evil-looking old women appeared in front of them. These old women were witches. Macbeth was frightened by this awful sight, and he asked the witches who they were. The answer he received from the first witch was, "Welcome, Macbeth, welcome, Thane of Clams." The second witch cried, "Welcome, Macbeth, welcome, Thane of Cawdor." The third witch cried, "Welcome, Macbeth, welcome, the man who will be king." Macbeth did not understand these words. He was a Thane of Clams, but he knew he was not the Thane of Cawdor, and he knew he was not the king. He was so shocked by this that he could not speak. The witches then turned to Banquo and spoke to him. "You are less important than Macbeth, and yet more important. You will not be so happy, and yet you will be happier. Your children will be kings, so you will not." Macbeth wanted the witches to tell him what their words meant, but it was too late. They disappeared as quickly as they had come. As Macbeth and Banquo stood discussing these strange words, two noblemen sent by King Duncan rode up to them to praise them for their victory. They told Macbeth that the king wished to reward him for fighting so well in the battle and had therefore given him a new title, which was Thane of Cawdor. Macbeth could not believe what he heard. When he was sure it was true, he began to think about the other words the witches had spoken. Could he really become king of Scotland? Banquo remained calm and warned Macbeth not to trust the witches too much. He realized that Macbeth was allowing himself think dangerous and wild thoughts, but Macbeth could not stop thinking about what the witches had said. He wondered what he could do to make their words come true. He was shocked by the ideas he had. Perhaps, after all, if it was his fortune to be king, there would be no need for him to do anything. After Macbeth's victory, King Duncan told him that he would like to visit his castle. This would be a great honor for Macbeth. When Macbeth heard this, he asked to be allowed to go home at once to prepare for the royal visit. Before he set off, he sent a letter to his wife, Lady Macbeth. In this letter, he told her about the witches and what they had said. He also told her that some of the witches' words had already come true. He encouraged his wife to believe that she might one day be Queen of Scotland. From that day on, Macbeth could think of nothing else. When Duncan told everyone that his elder son, Malcolm, would be king after him, Macbeth wondered how he could deal with this difficulty. Lady Macbeth. When Lady Macbeth read her husband's letter, she was determined that he should rule Scotland. She was sure that Macbeth would have to act without mercy for others. He would have to make himself king, but she was afraid he was too kind to do it. Lady Macbeth knew that her husband would love to be king, but she also realized that she would have to urge him to take action. She decided that Duncan must be murdered while he was staying with them at their castle that night. Lady Macbeth did not believe anyone would discover who had killed the king. She was certain that Macbeth was so well loved and admired that no one would think that he had done it. As soon as Macbeth came home, she told him about her plan. She advised him to show no sign that anything was wrong and to welcome his guests cheerfully. She said he did not need to do any more than that. Leave the rest to me, she said. The king arrived and was welcomed by Lady Macbeth with great respect. Duncan was pleased. The castle garden seemed calm and beautiful after the battle, and it was very pleasant to rest and to be among friends. Here he thought he could forget for a while the troubles of his kingdom. He had supper with Macbeth, who showed him the room where he would sleep. When the king went to bed, he felt peaceful and happy. He was so pleased with everything about his visit that he sent a wonderful diamond to Lady Macbeth as a present. Macbeth felt neither calm nor peaceful. He was sure he could not murder the king. He could not kill one of his own relatives, a guest in his own castle. He was responsible for Duncan's safety because the king was his guest. Besides, he was such a good and fair king that it seemed very wicked to kill him. While Macbeth was considering what to do, Lady Macbeth came into the room. He told her he could not kill Duncan. The king has given me great honors already, and I am very popular with the people. I am grateful for this. It is enough for me, he said. Lady Macbeth told him that she would never respect him again and that she would always think of him as a coward. She told him that they would certainly succeed if they were determined enough. She explained to him how easy it would be to murder Duncan without anyone ever finding out about it. Macbeth changed his mind and agreed to do everything that his wife suggested. She said that she would give some wine to the two guards at the door of Duncan's room. She would put a drug in the wine, and this would make them fall asleep very quickly. Then it would be easy for Macbeth to get past the guards and murder Duncan while the king was sleeping. Later, they could blame the guards for committing the crime, the murder of Duncan. Later that night, when the guests were in bed and the castle was quiet, Lady Macbeth went to the king's room. She gave the drugged wine to the guards, and they soon fell asleep. She took their daggers and placed them where Macbeth would find them. Lady Macbeth felt brave enough to kill Duncan herself and went into his room. However, when she saw the king lying on his bed asleep, he looked like her dead father, and she could not do anything to harm him. She returned to her room and waited for her husband to go and do the deed. Macbeth crept through the dark and silent castle. Suddenly he saw a terrible sight. A knife covered in blood appeared before his eyes. The handle was turned towards his hand. He stretched out his hand to take it, but it was not real. He realized that thinking about the murder of the king was affecting his mind. He heard a bell ring. It was Lady Macbeth in her room, letting Macbeth know that she had prepared everything. Now was the time to act. Macbeth went on towards Duncan's room. He was even more frightened than before. The two guards at the door were fast asleep, and so was the king himself. It was easy for Macbeth to go in. No one would ever have guessed that Duncan's most faithful commander was going to kill him. It did not take Macbeth more than a few seconds to do the awful deed. After killing Duncan, as Macbeth moved back towards the door, he heard one of the guards laughing in his sleep. The other servant cried out, "Murder!" But he too was asleep and only dreaming. Then they both woke up, but they did not see Macbeth there, and they did not know that anything was wrong. They soon went back to sleep. In her room, Lady Macbeth waited anxiously for her husband to return. She listened to every sound, and when she heard some noises coming from the king's room, she thought Macbeth had failed. But at that moment, he returned and told her he had done the terrible deed. Although he had killed the king, Macbeth was a very frightened man. He knew his peace and happiness had been destroyed forever by that crime. He was very shocked and dared not think about what he had done. He told his wife he thought he could hear a voice shouting out, "Sleep no more. Macbeth shall sleep no more because he has murdered innocent sleep." His wife scolded him for his weakness and for bringing the guards' daggers back from Duncan's room. They were covered in blood. She told him to go back and put them beside the guards and to wipe some of Duncan's blood on their clothes. Then everyone would think they were the murderers. Macbeth did not dare to go back and see what he had done, so Lady Macbeth went instead. Macbeth could not rest. His mind was full of wild thoughts and fears. Every noise he heard frightened him. He kept on staring at his hands, which were covered with blood. He imagined that they would never be clean again. He thought there could not be enough water in all the seas to wash that blood away. Instead, he thought the blood on his hands would turn the green seas red. Lady Macbeth returned. Her hands were now covered with blood too, but she told her husband, "A little water will clear away this deed." "How easy it is then," she told him, "to go to bed as if nothing had happened. People would be suspicious if they were found awake and dressed in the middle of the night." Early the next morning there was a loud knocking at the castle gates. Two of Duncan's noblemen, Macduff and Lennox, had come to offer their services to Duncan. Macbeth went to welcome them. They told him that where they had been staying that night, the weather had been very wild and stormy. The wind was so strong it had blown the chimneys down. People heard strange noises in the air, like the sound of people crying and the terrible screams of people dying. Some said they had felt the earth shaking. While they were speaking, the terrible murder was discovered. Soon everyone in the castle knew the dreadful news. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth both pretended to be very shocked. When Macbeth was told of the murder, he went straight to the king's room. He found the king's two servants there. Their hands and faces were covered with blood and their daggers unwiped while lying where they had been sleeping. They could not understand what had happened and stared at each other in confusion. Macbeth killed them immediately. When he returned, he said he was sorry he had killed the servants, but that his feelings of love for the king had been too strong for him. He could not stop himself from killing the king's murderers. When he saw them standing there with Duncan's blood on their clothes and on their daggers, of course Macbeth hoped to hide his own guilt by doing this. Lady Macbeth pretended to be so shocked when she heard the news that she became ill and had to be helped from the room. Duncan's son Malcolm and the men were staying at Macbeth's castle. They decided to run away. They did not think that their lives would be safe if they remained in Scotland. They thought that the person who had killed Duncan in order to be king would surely try to kill his sons too because they ought to be king after him. One of them went to England, the other to Ireland. They left so quickly that some people were certain they must be the ones who had killed the king. Macbeth was then the nearest relative to Duncan left in Scotland, and so everyone agreed that he should be king. The words of the witches had come true. Banquo's ghost. Although he was now king, Macbeth did not feel safe after his terrible crime. He could not trust anyone, not even his oldest friends. He was most afraid of Banquo, who had been with him when the witches spoke to him. Banquo knew that Macbeth had been excited by the witches' words and that he really wanted to be king. Besides, the witches had said that the kingdom would one day be ruled by Banquo's family. This thought made Macbeth both angry and afraid. He had risked his own life when he murdered Duncan. He wondered whether he had helped Banquo even more than himself. Macbeth felt that he could not safely allow him to live, and he decided to murder Banquo's son also. He was so frightened and so determined not to lose the kingdom he had just won that he planned to commit murder again. In order to kill Banquo, the new king and queen gave a great feast for the chief noblemen. They invited Banquo and his son Fleance as the most important guests. That day, Banquo and Fleance went out riding, but on their way back to Macbeth's castle, they were attacked by three men. Macbeth had paid these men to kill Banquo and France, but in the struggle, France escaped. Though Banquo was murdered, his son managed to get to England, and Banquo's family did later become kings of Scotland. In spite of all Macbeth's plans, the things the witches said to Banquo came true. The time for the feast arrived, and the king and queen sat down happily with their guests. The queen welcomed everyone and was determined to delight her guests. Macbeth talked freely with the noblemen, and everyone was pleased with the feast. Macbeth said cheerfully that he hoped his two chief guests would soon arrive. Suddenly he rose from his seat, trembling with fear. All the visitors noticed and wondered what had happened. Macbeth thought he could see Banquo sitting in the chair that had been kept for him, but no one else could see anything. Lady Macbeth tried to calm her anxious guests. She assured them that Macbeth was not really ill. Turning to him, she told him firstly to control his fear. Before everyone guessed their secret, at that moment Banquo's ghost seemed to disappear. Macbeth, with more courage now, sat down again. He drank some wine and wished all his visitors, including Banquo, good health. When he said, "We missed our dear friend Banquo and wish that he were here," Banquo's ghost appeared again. Macbeth was helpless with fear and could not bear the terrible sight. He cried out in a loud voice to the ghost to go away. Everyone got up, wondering whether Macbeth had gone mad. They could see nothing. The queen quickly asked her guests to leave in case Macbeth said even more suspicious things. She told them that Macbeth's behavior was not unusual and that these fears did not last for very long. However, Lennox and some other noblemen did not forget what had happened and were suspicious of Macbeth's strange behavior. Macduff had not even come to the feast because he was afraid it might be some kind of trap for the king's enemies. Macbeth was afraid too. Many noblemen did not trust him, and France was alive in England. He was prepared to kill anyone to defend his position. He decided to ask the advice of the three witches again. They seemed to know about everything that would happen. Macbeth's cruelty. Early the next day, Macbeth went to the lonely place where he had met the witches. He found them preparing magic mixtures from parts of animals and plants. They used these secret mixtures to obtain knowledge of future events. Macbeth asked them to tell him what would happen to him, and immediately he saw three devils in front of him. The first was in the form of a head wearing a battle helmet. Macbeth began to speak to it, but the witches told him to be silent. Then the head slowly said, "Macbeth, Macbeth, Macbeth, watch!" Macduff watched the scene of life. After this, the head disappeared into the ground. The second devil appeared to the noise of thunder. It was in the form of a child covered in blood. It told Macbeth to be very cruel, bold and determined, and to fear no one. There was no one born of a woman who could harm him. Macbeth at once thought of the warning he had just received about Macduff. "I need not fear him then," he thought, but he decided that he would kill Macduff anyway to be quite safe. Then a third devil appeared. It was a child dressed like a king with a tree in its hand. It said, "Macbeth shall never lose a battle until great Birnam wood moves towards Dennis Hill." "That will never happen," said Macbeth to himself. He was encouraged by these words. He believed all he had heard, and he felt he need never fear his enemies again. Before Macbeth left the place, he asked the witches whether any of Banquo's children would ever become kings of Scotland. This was the one problem that still worried him. The three old women warned him not to ask this, but he insisted. He heard music, and one by one, eight shadows passed by him. They were the shadows of kings. The last one was Banquo, covered in blood, who turned his head and smiled at Macbeth. He was holding a mirror in his hand, in which Macbeth could see still more kings. These were all the children of Banquo, and would rule Scotland after Macbeth. Macbeth was very shocked and cried, "This is a terrible sight. Now I see what it means." For Banquo is pointing to the kings in the mirror to show that they are his children. "Will this really happen?" The witches assured him that it would, and then the sound of the music faded away and they disappeared. As Macbeth was returning from the witches, he met one of his noblemen. This man told him that Macduff had left his home and family suddenly and had gone to England to join Malcolm Duncan's son. Malcolm hoped to gather an army to defeat Macbeth. Then he could become king of Scotland as his father had planned. Macbeth was very angry when he heard this news. He attacked Macduff's castle and savagely killed his wife and all his children. This deed and other actions like it did had little to help Macbeth. Many of his noblemen and soldiers hated him for his unnecessary cruelty. Some left him and joined his enemies. Those who stayed with him did not respect or admire him any longer. Macbeth himself was always anxious and unhappy. The death of Lady Macbeth, the queen suffered from terrible dreams because of her guilt. Her servants often found her walking around the castle in her sleep, talking wildly about the murder. One night, a doctor and one of the queen's ladies were talking about her. The lady was saying how one night she had seen the queen get out of bed, put on a warm coat, and then go to her desk, unlock it, and take out some paper. She wrote a letter, read what she had written, folded it, and put it away in the desk, and then returned to bed. Yet the whole time she was fast asleep. As they were talking, the queen walked past. She was carrying a lighted candle. Her eyes were wide open, but she was asleep. Then she stopped, put the candle down, and began to rub her hands. The lady said she had often seen the queen do that. It looked as if she was washing her hands. She would do it for a quarter of an hour without stopping. "There is a spot of blood here," Lady Macbeth said suddenly. She spoke aloud, but she was talking to herself. She rubbed her hands harder. "Oh, go away, dreadful spot!" she cried. "Will my hands never be clean?" She lifted one of her hands to her face. "There is still the smell of blood here," she said. "Oh, all the perfume in the world will never make this little hand smell sweet again." And then she began to cry loudly in fear and horror. After a while she became quieter. She spoke some more, as if she were talking to Macbeth. Then she went back to bed. All this time she had seemed to be awake, but she was really asleep. A few days later, Lady Macbeth was dead. Many people said she killed herself. The moving mood. Macbeth tried to gather an army to fight Malcolm, but he had no friends left and no one wanted to help him. He began to wish he were dead, but he had enough courage left to come out of his castle at Dunsinane and fight a hopeless battle against his enemies. While Macbeth was preparing for the battle, a messenger came to tell him that he had seen a strange sight. "As I was watching on the hill for the enemy, I looked towards Benham and I saw the wood begin to move." "You are a liar and a slave," cried the king. Then he added, "If you are lying, I will hang you from the nearest tree. But if your story is true, I do not care if you hang me instead." He thought to himself, "Now I doubt the advice of the witches who spoke the truth but tricked me all the time. The words of those devils never mean what they seem to mean." Then Macbeth went out to meet his enemy. The messenger had not lied. When Markham's army was marching through Burning Wood, he ordered each man to cut down a branch and carry it with him. Thus Macbeth would find it much more difficult to estimate the size of the attacking army. The result was that the whole of Burning Wood seemed to be moving towards Dunsinane. In spite of his hopeless situation, Macbeth fought fiercely and with great courage. He remembered that the witches had said that no one born of a woman could harm him, and this increased his bravery. He killed many of his enemies, although his own small army did not support him well. Meanwhile, Macduff, who was leading the first part of Markham's army, was determined to fight Macbeth. He wished to kill the king himself because Macbeth had murdered his family. At last, two men saw each other. Macbeth did not want to fight, but Macduff rushed towards him, and a fierce struggle began. Macbeth fought savagely, thinking of his dead family, but Macbeth was not at all afraid. He told Macduff that his life was protected against anyone who had been born of a woman. Macduff replied that he had not been born of a woman in the ordinary way, but had been taken from his mother's body before the proper time. For a moment Macbeth's courage disappeared. "I will not fight you then," he cried to Macduff. Macduff laughed. "Live then, a prisoner, and see all men laugh at you as a coward." Macbeth thought for a moment and then replied, "I will never obey young Markham or be cursed by the people. Let us fight, Macduff." After a great struggle, Macduff killed the king and cut off his head. He presented it to Markham, the new king. Everyone was relieved that the reign of the cruel King Macbeth had ended. Thanks for listening. For new videos, don't forget to subscribe my channel. And if you like my videos, please share and like.